Welcome back and good evening. I just thought that this time we'll assume that you're watching in the evening. Our second lecture on social contract theory. It's important to notice the influence of social contract theory on politics in the United States. So though this is a ethics lecture, and before we're done with this lecture, I'm going to come back to ethics. We need to see the great importance of social contract theory historically on our politics. So let's review. The social contract theory says that the rules are the rules that we all agree to for our mutual benefit. That is, in order to escape the state of nature. When we're talking about social contract theory in politics, we're talking about the political rules. Now we have I'll have three different illustrations of the importance of social contract theory. First of all, Thomas Hobbes himself, remember back in the 1600s, he was a supporter of Charles I. When the Puritans under Oliver Cromwell won the war, they arrested the king, declared him guilty of treason, and chopped his head off. Thomas Hobbes fled the country and lived in France for a while. He was a monarchist. He believed in the king and the rule of the king. Thomas Hobbes says, we need to have a central power. We need to have a king or a queen, because we had Elizabeth, that was fine too. If we don't have a monarch, we live in the state of nature. And you see how Hobbes was influenced by his experience during the Civil War. He knew from experience what a state of nature was. In the middle of a civil war, people can do anything they want. You'd have to dig into your history books to find some of the evil things that happened during the English Civil War. Suppose somebody objects. What if we have a bad king or queen? Thomas Hobbes says, you can't disobey. What if we not just had a bad king or queen, we had a truly evil, an apostate king or queen? What if we had a Catholic king again in England? Hobbes pushes his point. He says, any rebellion, well, what you're really doing? You're moving from a civilized world to the state of nature. Now, any king, no matter how bad the king is, will have a law saying that you shouldn't disobey him. So if you disobey him, he can arrest you for breaking the law. But once you really think about it, that rebellion is moving toward the state of nature, Hobbes would say, the king could have you arrested just for being crazy. You are deliberately moving toward the state of nature. So Hobbes's conclusion on the state of the social contract theory reasoning, no rebellion ever, because we have to obey the king or queen in order to live a civilized life. A generation later, now in the 1700s, the early 18th century, there is another philosopher, John Locke. And he's looking back on the revolution that the English sometimes call the Glorious Revolution of 1689. A little bit of English history. Thomas Hobbes fled into England and he lived in France until the Puritans lost power and the English restored their monarchy under Charles II. So Hobbes comes back and he lives in England and he writes his books. After Hobbes' death, 10 years later, in 1689, the English have another upset. They're they're changing their governments every once in a while. They got a new king. They imported a king. They brought in William and Mary. John Locke, in the 1700s, is looking back on this revolution, and he says it was a good thing. But he's going to use the social contract theory, the same theory that Hobbes had, but he's going to come to a different conclusion. He says, the contract says that we agree together. That means the citizens and the monarch have agreed together. It's not just that we gave up our rights and the monarch now rules. We agreed. And then Locke says, so if the ruler is really, really bad, so bad that the ruler has broken the contract, then the people can act. And so Locke draws the conclusion that the social contract theory implies that the legitimacy of government lies in the consent of the people. Now, that's a wildly different conclusion from Hobbes. Locke says since government is legitimate when it has the consent of the people, if government is bad enough that the people would not consent to it, then the people still have the right, theoretically at least, to rebel. And that's what we really did back in good old 1689 when we got the new king and queen. So that's all theoretical in Locke. Well, there's this guy who lives across the water who reads his Locke and borrows heavily from Locke. He writes something called the Declaration of Independence when instructed by the Continental Congress. Thomas Jefferson is also in the social contract theory. And here I want to direct your attention to the actual contents of the Declaration of Independence. Most of us are familiar with those famous words at the beginning. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Really wonderful rhetoric and propaganda at the beginning of the Declaration of Independence. Have you read the rest of the Declaration of Independence? Basically, it's a shopping list. Or a complaints list. King George III has done this to us, and it's really bad. And King George III has done this to it, and this, and this, and this. It's a long list of complaints and grievances that the American colonists had against the King of England. And that's the bulk of the Declaration of Independence. Why? Because Jefferson is making a social contract argument on the lines of Locke that the contract has been broken, not by us good American, that is British, now American citizens. The contract's been broken and violated by the king and Parliament, who won't give us a right to vote. So we have a right not to a theoretical revolution, but to a real revolution. Let's go yet another example. Contract in politics only now in the middle of the 20th century. Martin Luther King Jr. is in prison in Birmingham, Alabama. He receives a letter written by clergymen, Catholics and Jews and Protestants, lots of mainline clergymen, writing to Martin Luther King Jr. saying, Martin, you're leading the civil rights movement in the wrong way. We're for you. We're for equal rights for, in those days they would say, Negroes. But you're breaking the law and you're going to bring the whole movement into disrepute. This leads to MLK's famous letter from a Birmingham jail where he says, yeah, we're breaking the law. Laws made by white people for the good of white people to keep black people down. We break laws that were made without our consent. No rational people would agree to laws designed by the oppressors to keep the oppressors down. In sum, the social contract theory has been used throughout U.S. history. It is the de facto theory of government in the United States. Now, I'm a pretty happy U.S. citizen, and I recognize that this is the truth of our system, and I approve of it. In terms of political theory, you may well approve of the social contract theory. But now we wrap back to ethics. The fact that we approve of, or at least I approve of, the social contract theory as a theory of government, does it work as a theory of ethics? Well, first of all, we ought to notice some big strengths of the theory. Remember, first of all, the definition. The rules are the rules that we all agree to. Only now we're going to put in the moral rules are the rules that we agree to escape the state of nature. They are for our mutual benefit. This has some terrific strengths to it. First of all, the social contract theory finds it very easy to affirm most of the moral truths that we already believe. Shouldn't steal from your neighbor? That's easy to justify. It's for our good. You should tell the truth. You should participate in government. You should restrain your sexual desires. All kinds of moral rules that we think we usually affirm are easy to affirm on the social contract theory. Furthermore, the social contract theory also explains why we should keep the rules, because they're for our mutual benefit. They're good for us. They may not feel good right now when I have to not do the thing that I want to do, but long-term, obeying moral rules is good for me. So the social contract theory of ethics has some real strengths. Unfortunately, it has one really big problem. I want to introduce two ideas. The two terms. Moral agent is somebody who can do something morally significant. I'm a moral agent, you are a moral agent. My teacup is not a moral agent. A moral patient is someone who can receive morally significant action. I'm a moral patient. If you treat me well, that's good. If you treat me badly, that's bad. And you are moral patients. My teacup is not a moral patient. Now, the theory implies a certain equation. The class of moral agents is equal to the class of moral patients, because the moral rules are the rules we agree to, there we are as agents, for our mutual benefit, there we are as patients. So there's an equality between the agents and the patients. Unfortunately, when you think about that, if you think carefully, because philosophy is thinking carefully, you will see that that's false. You have your firstborn son. He's lying there. You're changing his diaper. He pees in your face. Evil child! No, we don't say anything. We have duties to infants, but we don't have a moral contract with infants. Now, someone might think, but the child will grow up, and that's why you have a moral duty to the infant, is because he will grow up and be an adult. Really? Suppose you had a tragedy in your life where your firstborn child was born with a disease that guaranteed that he would die before 2 years old. So he will never fulfill any obligations to you. We all believe that we have moral duties to such an infant, even though there is no equality between us as agent and patients. Similar examples could be given with the Alzheimer's victim who's living in the retirement home. He used to be a moral agent, but he's not a moral agent anymore. And yet, if we mistreated him because he is still a moral patient, we would be shocked and we would alarmed if we heard that somebody mistreated an Alzheimer's victim. More generally, what about animals? Do we have moral duties to animals? Or some of us believe that we have moral duties to the environment at large. So the examples begin to pile up one after another after another. There are moral patients. Infants, demented people, kitty cats, trees. there are things that we feel we have moral duties to these things, even though they have no moral duties to us. So the equation between moral agent and moral patient is simply false. The social contract theory may be a very good theory of politics, but it seems to have major limitations when it comes to as a theory of ethics.